Oh, this is a Union. Kick him to this side. This is a Confederate. Kick him to this side. 51,000. 10 New Orleans in 3 days. Who gets that job? Who does get that job? Because guess what? The soldiers who survive, guess what they got to do? Go fight another battle. So dude, who cleans up the mess? That's why it takes 4 months. Whoa. And you've smelled one animal by the side of the road? That kind of stinks. Can you imagine the stench of 10 New Orleans in 3 days? Lincoln says, I don't know what I'm going to say. I don't know. He is working with his speech on the ride there, trying to figure out what it is he will say. There's a cat who speaks for 2 hours at this ceremony. But for some of you, now that I've told you what I've told you, that makes sense. If that was your daddy or your brother or somebody you love who's one of those dead, don't they deserve more than a few seconds of thought about 10 New Orleans in 3 days dying? Somebody better explain this and explain it well. Why did this number of people have to die? That is insane. 3 days. That is insane. Explain it to me. This guy tried for 2 hours to talk about it. Finally, Lincoln steps up. A couple of things to point out about this speech. There's no microphone system for all these people to hear what he has to say. This is a speech that has not yet been published, and so nobody has it in front of them. So when he gets ready to talk, nobody's following some kind of teleprompter or something that's shot into the sky or on a handheld device so you can read what he's saying. So only the people up close, or even the ones that are going to really get to hear what he has to say anyway. He'll publish this after the fact, and it becomes the speech of all speeches. 272 words long to talk about 10 New Orleans in 3 days. What are you going to say? We now turn to the speech. It is significant that on page 536, your literary analysis topic is diction. The words that are chosen. Now that I've told you this backstory, you go, well, that makes some sense. I mean, what would you say? What are the words that he was working on that little piece of envelope on his way to the speech itself? He was editing as he drove to give the speech. Still not sure what to say. Still not sure what to say. Because there's a lot of people today. So he steps up in front of them and he says, 77 years ago. Let's listen to the speech read by a professional reader. All I want you to do is follow it, and then we're going to come back to do a little bit of exegesis. All right? Here we go. The Gettysburg Address. Let's pay attention. Just follow it. See how well you do. All right?
The Gettysburg Address by Abraham Lincoln. 77 years ago, our fathers brought forth on this continent a new nation, conceived in liberty and dedicated to the proposition that all men are created equal. Now we are engaged in a great civil war, testing whether that nation or any nation so conceived and so dedicated can long endure. We are met on a great battlefield of that war. We have come to dedicate a portion of that field as a final resting place for those who here gave their lives that that nation might live. It is altogether fitting and proper that we should do this. But in a larger sense, we cannot dedicate, we cannot consecrate, we cannot hallow this ground. The brave men, living and dead, who struggled here have consecrated it far above our poor power to add or detract. The world will little note, nor long remember what we say here, but it can never forget what they did here. It is for us, the living, rather, to be dedicated here to the unfinished work which they who fought here have thus far so nobly advanced. It is rather for us to be here dedicated to the great task remaining before us, that from these honored dead we take increased devotion to that cause for which they gave the last full measure of devotion, that we here highly resolve that these dead shall not have died in vain, that this nation under God shall have a new birth of freedom, and that government of the people, by the people, for the people, shall not perish from the earth.
Now, as an instructor who loves to teach rhetoric, well-written essays, models that maybe we can point to say, if you really want to write well, here's a good model. I can obviously say to you, as I think I said to you about the Declaration of Independence, for example, you are looking at true compositional genius. Kind of funny, not bad for a kid who was fundamentally homeschooled all his life and didn't even have formal education to speak of. Not bad for a kid who grew up reading just a small handful of books, the Bible and a few other books along with it. An amazing, amazing presentation here at the rhetorical side, and that's where we really want to spend a lot of our time now. I want to talk about this essay as an essay of threes. Do you see it? So let's start there, both at level 1 and at level 2B. This is an essay of threes, and so I hope that I can engage your mind a little bit as you start to look at the threes of this essay, and as we go through it, we will point it out. I would recommend, as I recommended in our study of the Declaration of Independence, that you pause our video for a moment and that you actually sit down and write all 272 words of this thing out. Draw a line down a sheet of paper. On the left-hand side of that line, just write the sentences. See how many sentences there are. Notice how many paragraphs there are. Did you see it? If I were to ask you in an exam, how many paragraphs are there in the Gettysburg Address, you would say what? See how that works? Okay, so starting right away, it's interesting to point out, you've got 3 paragraphs. The 272 words are divided into 3 paragraphs. And so we're obviously going to ask ourselves a simple question. What is said in each one of these 3 paragraphs? The second thing I want to talk about with you for your notes at 2B. Let's write it down at 2B. The varying of sentence length. The varying of sentence length. You want to write this down. For those of you who want to go on to really grow as writers, as students, I'm going to challenge you, as you mature as writers, to begin to think about varying your sentence length. Don't write all of your sentences the same length, either really long or really short. We want to point out that Lincoln understood the power of modulating sentence length. Notice, he's going to have a long, followed by a short and a short. Maybe then another long, followed by a moderate length sentence. Now that makes sense, especially if he's giving a speech. Yes? He's giving a speech, so he can't have really long sentences. His sentences are going to have to be very directed to what it is that he wants to say. His, what we would call, compositional purpose, or his rhetorical purpose. What is his purpose? Let's write it down really quickly. What is the purpose of this, what is often referred to as an address? It's actually just a speech, isn't it? Right? Just another word for speech. What is this address or this speech? What is the point of it? Well, some of you will write down, the point of this speech is to say, sorry, 10 New Orleans in 3 days needs an apology. Whoops, that's a lot of people that die. Sorry, right? Some of you would say that the purpose of this speech is to explain the deaths, as if somehow that can be done. Explain the deaths. In other words, give an explanation. All these people had to die for this reason, right? Make some sense of it. All those people died. Right? Some of you will say that the purpose of the speech is to make an excuse, of course. Some of you will say that the purpose of a speech like this is to kind of maybe look to the future. Well, now that's interesting to say it that way, because there's 3 directions in time we can speak about. Aren't there? We even teach you this when we talk about tense, don't we? There is past tense, present tense, now, and, right, future tense. Let's point out the ways in which, oh, by the way, just to point it out, that is 3 the last time I checked. Past, present, future is 3, right? Let's point out the ways in which Lincoln is acutely aware of past, present, future. The genius of this speech, working on multiple levels, to say in 272 words what needs to be said, that we still today have to sit up and go, whoa, there's some serious genius. What an amazing leader. Many have argued Abraham Lincoln, our greatest president, because of this speech. Not just this speech. This speech encapsulates what Lincoln was all about, what he understood. For example, without even beginning to go into all the details, did you notice that he never once mentions the Confederacy? The states who started this mess. The states who are responsible for all this death. The states who wanted to keep their slaves, and that's why we had to have 10 War Lists and 3. Did you notice he doesn't even mention the South? Did you notice he doesn't mention the Union troops either? Did you notice this? Fascinating, right? Hey, those scumbag Southerners decided they had to get together and keep their slaves. They're the reason 10 New Orleans had to die in 3 days. None of that. None of that. The tone of this speech upset a lot of people. This speech was published in Confederate papers as well as Northern papers. It is a genius moment in composition. Everybody already knows why we're fighting this stupid war. The question is, where will we go? What happens next? What will be the end of it all? Because 28,000 Confederate soldiers, along with 23,000 Union soldiers, this was a battlefield for both of them. And look where he starts. The past. Notice how he says it. 7 years ago. And immediately everybody's doing mental math. Whoa, what, a score is 20 years, 4 of those, plus 7. Ooh, that's 1776. That's 1776. 87 years ago means that there are people, theoretically, who were alive when Tom Jefferson wrote those words, who are still alive. Wasn't that long ago. Hasn't even been 100 years ago that the project gets started called America with the Declaration of Independence. But now, let's take a look at how he frames this language of the past. 7 years ago, look what he calls Jefferson. Look what he calls all of those thinkers of the 87 years ago in the Philadelphia Convention. He calls them fathers. Fathers? What are you talking about, fathers? Now, those guys had children, but... and immediately we realize, for your notes, let's write it down. Lincoln's going to play the game of metaphor. He's going to say, Tom Jefferson, Hamilton, Jay, the rest of those amazing, Madison, those forefathers, founding fathers, they were fathers that brought forth on this continent a new nation. Wait a minute. Fathers don't bring forth birth. Mothers bring forth birth. Am I right or am I right? Notice how Lincoln's playing a very interesting game here. He is saying that the very beginning of it all happened just a brief number of years ago on this continent. A new nation. What is he going to say about that new nation? Look at it. Conceived in liberty. Notice he capitalizes liberty. and dedicated to the proposition that all men are created equal. And for the really slow in the audience, they go, oh, he's talking about the Declaration of Independence, that second paragraph. We hold these truths to be self-evident. All men are created equal and endowed by their Creator with certain inalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Oh, yeah, that. The very thing that started all this thing called America. Notice the first paragraph is one sentence. Long or short? Write it down. Long or short? And notice as well that you've got some commas that give this a balance of how many parts to this sentence. I'm telling you, if you learn how to read close, you will not forget this passage. You'll be ready for the examination. But you also will have a certain kind of appreciation. Notice 7 years ago, our forefathers brought forth on this continent a new nation, comma. That's one phrase. Conceived in liberty, comma. That's two. And dedicated to the proposition that all men are created equal, period. Last time I checked, that's 3. The balance of the Trinity. I'd write it down. Now some of you will go, Trinity, that's a religious term. No, it's not a religious term. It gets used in religion, often, the Holy Trinity. But Trinity just means 3, if anything. The balance of the Trinity is, of course, the pristine geometric form of the triangle. That is to say, you have 3 points. Boom, boom, boom. I told you, the 3s in this essay are going to be remarkable. And at some point, you have to say, dude, this ain't just luck, and it ain't just random. Lincoln knew what he was doing as he started his project. Paragraph 1 done. Can you reduce it to a single line at level 1? What does he say? Can you put it in your own words? I'm trying to teach you how to read here as you work through it. Hey, if you can work through a speech like this and understand it, 2 things, you're not going to forget it. And secondly, you might actually sit up and say, whoa, 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 what an amazing country if it can produce a mind like this to try to explain 10 worlds in 3 days. And his first comment is the past. Question, why would he begin in the past to talk about 10 worlds in 3 days? Can you write down any answer to that on your own? Why would he begin in the past to explain 10 worlds in 3 days? Why? Why wouldn't he start right now or start in the future? Why would he go back into the past? What's the point of Jefferson? Oh yeah. And a few years later, on that really nasty, nasty hot day in D.C., when Martin Luther King Jr. decides to give his famous speech, I Have a Dream, he is standing on the steps in Washington, D.C. of what monument? Oh yeah. The Lincoln Memorial. I hope someday you get to see it if you haven't. You walk up white stairs that you can't see at the top of them. And all of a sudden you crest the top stair and there he is. There he is. Abraham Lincoln, sitting. You can Google this and see this is incredible. Sitting in his chair. He's huge. When you stand next to him, you have to look all the way up to see him. He's huge. MLK decides to stand on the steps in front of the Lincoln Memorial to give his famous I Have a Dream speech, and he doesn't begin with Lincoln. Go back and look at the speech. I'm making a 3A observation here, aren't I? Go back and look at the speech. Where does he begin? Martin Luther King Jr. He begins with Jefferson and the Declaration of Independence. MLK understood what Lincoln understands. It all begins with Jefferson and the Declaration of Independence. You are sitting here now because of Jefferson and the Declaration of Independence. That is why you are here. That is what it means to be an American. And Lincoln understood that. Because, are you ready for this? Both the North and the South had tremendous respect for Jefferson. That was smart. That was smart. He started with a figure both sides would agree is amazing. And he started with a nation. He started by talking about a nation. Not the North nation, the Union, or the South nation, the Confederacy. He said nation. And then he said the nation was conceived in liberty. and dedicated to an idea, a proposition that everybody's equal. Why are we fighting the Civil War? The right to own slaves. And if you've studied somebody like Frederick Douglass, he will comment on the fact, slavery, the big thing is no freedom, no liberty. That's where he starts. Past. Paragraph 2. Present. Now. I'd write that down. Some of you will go, oh, this is kind of cool. Once you actually start studying a passage like this, you go, he goes from the past to the present. I wonder if he'll get to the future before the end of 272 words. And an astute reader of this text will go, I bet you he does. I bet you he does. Which is why MLK will finish his speech with, I have a dream. The future. But before we get to the future, let's deal with the present. Look what he says. Now, we are engaged in a great civil war. There's the term, we write it down. We call it the Civil War, in large measure because of this phrase. Civil? As a famous piece of line said, what's so civil about war anyway? To be civil means that you're polite to each other. That's one meaning of the word civil. Another meaning, of course, is family. We are engaged in a great family war. A house divided against itself. The North, the South. Notice the use of the pronoun we. He doesn't say the North. He doesn't say the South. He doesn't say the Union. He doesn't say the Confederacy. He says we are engaged in a great civil war. Comma. What is the point